Hello, hello again. This is our last session of the day, and I am very excited for it. Yeri is going to be talking about data strategy for the analytics engineer. She has been a member of the OA Club for a couple months now, which has been great. Her contributions are always lovely, so I'm sure this talk is going to be awesome. Yeah, she is just a general data aficionado, and I'm pretty sure that you all are going to learn quite a bit from her. And you know the lay of the land at this point of the platform. And if you have any questions, drop them in Q&A, and we will talk about them at the end. But yeah, with that, Yuri, I'll let you take it away.
Started, I'll introduce myself. So, as Ali said, my name is Jerrie Kumalah, and I am a senior analytics engineer at Firefly Health. I am a self proclaimed data detective, and I am a believer in the power of data. Um, data. So, I'm someone who's gotten the opportunity to work in different spaces, and I've seen data used in many different ways. So, I'm excited to talk a little bit more about what I think about data strategy and what I mean by that. So hopefully by the end of my talk today, I would hope that you're able to define what data strategy looks like to you in your current role, that you would be able to identify a few questions that really resonate with you that you can just consistently use with your stakeholders to refine your approach when you're thinking about data problems. And I will highly encourage you to fully embrace slowing down. Um, I was reviewing a lot of the different talks for these next 2 days. And one common theme in the actionable advice track is definitely the need to ask questions. I was just in Taylor's talk on tackling apathy with agile analytics, and Irina's talk just now on understanding the business question. And they both felt like perfect primers, basically, to what I'm going to talk about. As practitioners, all of us have often been asked a number of questions from our stakeholders and just like asked to execute without really understanding the why. So, my goal through this talk is to challenge us to slow down and focus on data strategy versus just responding to specific requests without a second thought. And it's not that I think that these requests don't often come from prior planning or company KPIs. It is more an issue of how can we get people to gain a better understanding of their current data landscape and how they should be using it. So before jumping into that, I'd like to talk about our relationship with data. I often like to think about my very first project that made me feel like I was really making a difference. It's like your first love, or if you were ever an athlete, it's like your very first win. Um, and that feeling is something that you always kind of like strive for, right? And as I've grown in my career, I've realized that maintaining that sense of purpose takes work. And like me and my track days, it requires a consistency in your approach. Hence my focus on data strategy, because I'm all about strategy. So I personally believe that stakeholders often approach data questions and problems from their understanding and their past exposure to data, which can really limit the types of questions they ask. And a lot of people have only had one-sided relationship with data. And what I mean by that is like they've not seen themselves as active participants. We know many people that often have a negative reaction when you're talking about numbers or when you're talking about like data in general. And so part of this is also shifting um, how people understand their role and how they engage in the types of questions they ask. So how do we get there, right? So together as practitioners, I strongly believe that you need your own philosophy and vision on how your role can support this. So my approach is pretty simple. It's just building a framework for consistently asking certain questions. And we've kind of seen that from a number of our different speakers today. It's just kind of like the structure and approach and how you think about that. And I think those processes and ways of thinking about data problems leads to like more focus, a greater understanding of how your analysis will impact the larger picture. It also teach people how to take their time to truly learn how to leverage the data that they have access to and exists for them and has been built for them. And it leads to also greater innovation because people start asking the right kinds of questions. I guess right is not necessarily the right word, but more they start asking innovative questions that resonates with their business and where they're at. So let's go into data strategy 101 and what I think about that. So I'm going to be speaking as an analytics engineer since that's what I've been doing for the past year. But this cuts across any role within the analytics space and data space. So as an analytics engineer, I provide clean data sets, right? I model data to empower our users to answer their own questions. That's the core of it. In my opinion, data strategy is just all about how you collect and use data. I'm actually going to read two definitions that I found that might do a better job at providing a clearer definition about data strategy and how it's talked about in the data world. So the first one is from Gartner, a technology consulting firm. And they define data strategy as a data strategy is a highly dynamic process employed to support the acquisition, organization, analysis, and delivery of data in support of business objectives. The second definition is from Stitch, a tool that many of us have used to ingest data. They define data strategy as data strategy refers to the tools, processes, and rules that define how to manage, analyze, and act upon business data. A data strategy helps you to make informed decisions based on your data and also helps you keep your data safe and compliant. I'm sure this resonates with all of us because we kind of think about this a lot. So in other words, really data strategy is about the tools, really data collection practices, quality, and so forth. So I think part of our role as data practitioners, no matter where you sit in the hierarchy of decision making, is to hone into the areas that resonate with you or aligns with the company's most pressing needs. So let's dig into that a little bit. Some companies have very clear data strategies and some don't. Some teams have defined approaches and definitions to how they manage their data. And others have a number of unspoken rules that you discover just as you work with your team and stakeholders. On the other side, many of us also have a data approach, a philosophy, or a framework depending on how opinionated you are about your data. And we don't often think about this, but sometimes our personal approach definitely impacts how we approach data questions within our company. So it's worth thinking through a bit and really sitting down with understanding where your company is at and where you are and finding that alignment. So as part of this process, as you're thinking through what the data strategy is, your company, you need to determine what your company's data strategy prioritizes. What's their focus, or where are they weak, or where are they digging into a little bit more? And once you identify that, you kind of should think, if you never really thought about it personally, you should sit down and really think about where your strengths or where have you found yourself leaning into a little bit more. So there's going to be 2 questions posted in the poll that I would love for all of you to answer. And then we can revisit it throughout the talk because I would love to see people's experiences with that. And so as I continue this presentation, I also would love to hear or have people share out their thoughts about what it means to them when they're thinking about that in their day-to-day or kind of their data opinions. So any person in the analytics sphere, many of us operate with a robust backlog. We find ourselves asking many different questions depending on what's put in front of us. It's how is the data collected? Does this data exist? Where does it come from? And so forth. You get the idea. It just leads to a lot of spinning, and there's always a lot more to know. I personally love asking questions, and I find myself asking hundreds. If I don't ensure that I have a focus on what is important, I'll just keep digging. I can just go further and further in. So what you see right now is just a very, very simple table, right? A simple framework. And it's just kind of something to make you pause for a second. So there's so many different elements to a data strategy that there's no way you can prioritize every aspect every time. So part of our role is to start identifying those key priorities, like I mentioned before. In my opinion, I feel having a data strategy helps create some focus on the approach to take with the work. and it helps your stakeholders to understand what is most important, not just to them, but to the company as a whole. Like it just leads a focus on like how you talk about data, how you coach your stakeholders about data problem, and it creates a shared alignment around how everyone should be approaching it, at the very least. So I was reading a book the other day. I love to read, and I keep finding all these different data books right now. The Self-Service Data Roadmap, and one of the lines that really resonated with me in that one, um, and made me really pause, was that enterprises today are data rich but insights poor. A lot of us tend to experience that. And based on a study by Gartner, 80% of analytics insights will not deliver outcomes through 2022. 80%. Like, sit on that for a second. Some of us have that feeling of like, am I really getting to the results I'm looking for? And we know that feeling, right? And some of us are like, you know when it's really hitting and when it's not. So looking at this table is just the starter for like a conversation around like how you prioritize. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot to know. And depending on what you focus on, you know, it's like what gets really done. So what does it look like for me? I have decided to really lean on um, this idea of like making sure I define useful. And the other piece is data quality. So I'm really interested in like how to improve the data quality and how do I spend time in really understanding what useful means to my stakeholders. So I basically ask myself, you know, how can I deliver on this request in a way that answers their question, but it's going to lead to the result the stakeholder wants to get into, but it's also going to help me remember where I want to add the most value. It's like finding all these combinations, right? And so I, I have prioritized those two buckets. I want the data products that I generate to be as useful as possible. And to get there, I have to dig a little deeper into things. And that means I want to know what useful means and feels and looks like beyond just my understanding of it. I also want to make sure I have a clear understanding of what the data is, like where it's coming from, how is it supposed to look. I like to spend time thinking about that data quality. And for me, it has been a great growth opportunity as an analytics engineer, having come in my previous role as a data scientist, is just kind of like really thinking about unit testing and data observability, ways to identify like the root causes to like data problems that we encounter. So those two areas like resonate with me and resonate with the needs at Firefly. So I'm going to work through two examples as best as I can. And the first one is the question, right? The question is around engagement. For me, what I realize is we already had a lot of data that existed around engagement. We even have a model around engagement. So I wanted to understand what did it really mean? And upon like, the question was really like, you know, is it increasing? Determine what's going on, blah, blah, blah. So we had stakeholders in 3 different teams thinking about this issue in different ways. So we had member operations, member experience, and clinical programs. And through questioning and really digging into like, how are we defining engagement and what it means? One of the things that came through is that we were trying to get a better understanding of what an active patient was versus a passively active versus someone that had just kind of taken a break from us. So Firefly Health provides virtual healthcare and coverage. And so just to give you a little bit of context. And so through our conversations, one of the big things we realize is like, we need to be able even to define engagement to different levels of granularity so that when I'm looking at what existed, we can see what really resonates. So all my line of questioning for this particular problem, I could have created a dashboard pretty easily looking at different things, was just more like, can we have a shared definition of engagement and how can we leverage what already exists, all the work that has been done by my colleagues? Second question was another one where is like, why can't I see the data for the past 3 months? So to give you a little background, we collect emergency visit data for our current patients, and our clinical team does a monthly review of these visits and notes to determine whether something was a real emergency or not. And then they assign a label, and that information is captured through a Google Sheet and then re-ingested into a model. So I was reading another book at the time, which is called Getting in Front on Data, which emphasizes in helping stakeholders understand what they are, that they are not only data consumers, but they're also data creators. So it's like I mentioned earlier, it's like redefining that relationship that people have with data, and also helping them understand what data quality really looks like for us, right? So I wanted to, when I was debugging and digging into that, it wasn't just like doing it in my bubble, but also I wanted them to understand their role in like how they're entering data, like how we reduce fragility, and just have an overall engagement around conversation around data quality and what it meant for us as a team, and how we went about QAing it, how we identify errors. And the reason why I took all that time to kind of like talk about how the data was flowing and all this stuff, knowing that I wanted to make sure that they also had an understanding of what data quality looked like and all that took place, but also to increase trust, right? Because there will be moments when the data is wrong. There will be moments when the pipeline is like there's something wrong with the data pipeline, but I want the trust to remain. And by them being a little more engaged in the process and knowing that whole flow, they understand that there are a lot of steps in place, but also they also um, get better identify their role in that process and that flow. Uh, I know that the next time there's an error, and I've seen it, my stakeholders are able to better understand what is happening. And all of a sudden, they have suggestions. Oh, we changed our process. Oh, we are no longer doing this monthly. We're doing this. We took a break. You know, like really talking through like how the data is entered. Oh, we changed how we entered dates. And then it's just kind of like being able to have these conversations in a way where they don't feel isolated from being part of it, but it still aligns with what's important and you're still getting it done. So, yes, this process takes time initially, but I can tell you it definitely pays off. Um, it does mean that you take on more of a coaching role. It does mean that you have to slow people down. But once you build that trust, you have an alignment of like how you ask questions and you're consistent in how you ask questions and what you prioritize. It gets easier for stakeholders to jump on board, be able to see like their role in the whole process and know why they answer any questions a certain way. But the beginning is just like building that relationship. And for me, I really lean into like my experience as an athlete and just kind of like everything else, it takes work. You will see the results, but you have to build that muscle and you have to keep practicing until they know what to expect of you and they know how to think about it. What I love, like one of the greatest compliments I had, like I got from one of my colleagues is like, oh, I put on my Yeri hat because I know like what you're going to ask and I know what's coming and I know like we're going to dig into this. And that's exciting because you know that it's a conversation and it's not, and even if the results are not what you expect, you know you've had an impact and you know it's aligning with this larger vision of like building a data culture, but also focusing on defining what useful is and defining and focusing on data quality. And for me, that's important. And those, uh, like, there are so many different elements to a data strategy, and everything's related, and you're touching all these different aspects, like data tools that are being used, all of that. But at least I know I will always focus on those two pieces. So that's where I begin. It also doesn't mean that you can deliver quickly. It just means you also have to like you find ways of how you prioritize your work and you see what resonates with your organization. Now it's your turn. As you think about that, it'd be nice to know if you had to pick two things within like that very simple grid that I shared. What types of questions would you ask, right? Um, which questions would you deprioritize from your queue? How would you change the scope of a ticket? And how would you advocate for your viewpoints? Like, what are the different pieces that you will kind of like, what are the trade offs that you would make? Those are some of the questions I would have for you. So, as we continue this conversation, I would love to hear your questions, your thoughts, your feedback, your stories, and I would love to see what the results of the poll is. So, I'm going to go to the poll and see if I can see anything. So 78% of people who answered the question was, does your company have a data philosophy or framework? And a lot of people said yes. That's wonderful. I've been in places where sometimes they don't have a strong data philosophy or a strong viewpoint on that. And it's just kind of like unspoken rules. At Firefly, what's nice is something that's evolving, and we've been working all together to like define it and shape it together. And the second question was, do you have a personal data philosophy or framework? And the majority of people said yes as well, which means that a lot of us have strong opinions. And so the larger question is like, do they align? Do the two um, approaches or strategies align? If not, where do you have to like, how do you address that? So I'll now pause because that's all I had to share really, and see if there are any questions and thoughts. I just saw a question from Matt, so I can go ahead and like try and answer that one. The question is, when you're getting started in a new domain, how do you leverage the stakeholders' domain knowledge to get up to speed? Um, a lot of the okay, so the way I would start is really going through the listening period. Oh, Ali, are you here?
Sweet. Yes. Now that we figured that. Thanks for your patience. There has to be one session of the day, and I got away clean with AV issues for the day, so this is apparently it. Um, Perfect. You were in the middle of answering Matt's question. Was that where you were at?
Yes.
Sweet.
Yes.
If you just want to continue on that one, I have another one, but yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to be like being the sponge at the very beginning. So making sure they're heavily a part of the conversation, because we have assumptions of how we would dig into a problem and how we would build either a data product or what we would surface thinking, and we have to see whether it really resonates. So at the very beginning, it's a lot of iterations until you figure out your dynamic with those stakeholders. That's usually how I approach. So I'm usually a lot, I start off in listening mode, and then I have stronger opinions once I understand their workflow, the subject a little bit more, and how to work with that individual.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. And mine, I guess, is a little bit on the flip side. Back at the beginning of your presentation, you were talking about one of your favorite moments in data being like when people start to know the kinds of questions that they should ask, but asking more useful or insightful or correct questions, I guess. How do you work with your less technical stakeholders to help them kind of build knowledge of like what is a right or a useful question from the beginning when they start to think a little bit more with data in mind?
Me, what has worked for me is like making sure it resonates with them. So I don't. Sometimes people ask questions and they think that is what they really want. And I think a question will start a certain way. I think Irina mentioned that, or and Taylor as well, like depending on the flow. But really, what you're trying to dig into is like how are you going to use it. If I drill into the how you're going to use it, it becomes more something that you really think about. Like, is this really what I want to know? Is this the question I truly wanted to know? Is it something that I was trying to share out with someone because it might look good, or that's what they expected of it? So it's trying to make it align with what would work for them versus just I'm reporting this out. It's needed for a deck or XYZ. It's also making sure sometimes you do have to just report for the deck. That's fine, but it's like for when you want to make sure it has some kind of impact and they are able to gain a better understanding of what things look like, right, for them, like what data is available to them. It's like, how are you going to use it? Are you going to use it to make a decision? And if you make a decision, is it a big decision or a small decision, right? Like, how important are these things? And once you start having those conversations, you're able to talk more about like, well, we don't ingest this information right now, but if you tell me how you'd like to use it, we can start working on what might resonate and what makes the most sense. And would this is what would need to happen. Things like that.
Awesome. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I love that combined, like your kind of like how framework or like how question model, I guess, combined with like Irina for folks who were here before, or the why model. I think it's a really powerful way to think through it. So awesome. Thank you for sharing those answers and for sharing a bunch of reading material and recommendations too. I will also be ordering them and reading through them. So I always appreciate that. So is there anything else you would like to share with the audience, or any questions you would like to leave people with to mull over before we wrap things up for the day?
The only thing I would say, and I'll say it again, it's okay to slow down. I think a lot of us are so used to wanting to do things really quickly and timely that we forget how to slow down. And sometimes slowing down is very powerful.
Awesome. Yeah, I love that advice. Um, I'm like writing down the timestamps so that we can pull in when we're doing our day highlights. So thank you for reiterating that. Um, Sweet. Well, thank you again for all your work on the presentation and for speaking as part of our event. It was super useful, and I'm sure everybody who saw it got a lot out of it. For folks who have any other questions for Yuri or who just want to learn more about her perspective on things, she is in our community, and you can ask her questions there, and also on LinkedIn, as she is included on this last slide. So with that, that is the end of our sessions for track 2 for today. We do have a breakout or a lounge item on track 1. Donnie, a customer data architect with Census, is going to be talking through data horror stories. So if you want to go from inspiring from Yuri's talk to horrifying in a secondhand gold sort of way, that is the session for you. It's just hanging out with folks. And then we'll have a workshop this afternoon on basically everything about data engineering in 3 hours, which is a nice committing topic for the afternoon. But that one is going to be happening over on track 1 if you want to go get a little bit more hands-on lecture material for the day. So awesome. Well, thank you again, Yuri. I really appreciate all the work you put into it, and thanks again everybody who has been a part of Summer Community Days today. It's been really cool.